we do these once a year, and you never know how it's going to go. But when we do these, what you find is that there are great graduate students in the American Dairy Science Association that are just so well spoken, way better than when I was at your level. Okay. So well spoken, and we can be really proud. Hello, and welcome to this special episode of Dairy Digressions, the new podcast of the American Dairy Science Association, the Journal of Dairy Science, and JDS Communications. I'm Matt Lucy, former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Dairy Science and former editor-in-chief of JDS Communications, fellow of the American Dairy Science Association, and I will be your host. Dairy Digressions is where you get an inside look at the science and the scientists that are making headlines both inside and outside the dairy industry. We explore the cutting-edge research that creates knowledge and drives innovation in the production and processing of milk for human consumption. Hey, everybody, you need to help me grow this podcast. All you need to do is like and subscribe and spread the word to a friend or colleague. Now let's get to this special episode. Today we highlight the graduate students of the American Dairy Science Association by meeting with the winners of the graduate student oral presentation and poster presentation contests from last year's meeting in West Palm Beach. Now, do not forget that you have to enter to win. The 2025 annual meeting will be held June 22 to 26 in Louisville, Kentucky. Abstract submissions are now open and will stay open until February 12th. It's not too late to finish up your lab work and where else and submit the abstract for this meeting. And please don't forget, all you grad students out there, the holidays are a great time to get work done because there are no classes. And if you're a grad student, tick the box for the competition. It's free. Now, on to today's podcast that includes our winners from last year's meeting. We have with us two people from the University of Wisconsin Food Science Program, Jason Princzynski and Philip Eberle. Welcome, guys. And we have from the University of Guelph, Amanda Fisher-Toulustos. So thank you very much, everybody, for meeting with us. I guess I'll start with Jason. And Jason, if you can chime in here. You and Philip are both from the University of Wisconsin.
That is correct.
And you're both in food science. Are you lab mates? Do you guys work in the same lab?
Yes, with the technicality that Philip graduated a few weeks ago. No, it's a few months ago now. Feels like it was just yesterday.
Oh my gosh. Philip, you're in the real world now?
I am working a full-time job and everything.
Where do you work?
I actually work with the JM Smucker Company. They recently acquired Hostess Brands. So I'm a part of the sweet baked snacks team there.
You're in like snack research then?
Yes.
And are you in Madison still? Have you moved?
I moved back home to Northeast Ohio, where I grew up on my family's dairy farm.
Oh, fantastic. And Jason, are you from dairy as well?
Kind of. So I grew up in a small town in western Wisconsin. I grew up on a former dairy farm. It started out as a dairy farm, and then it migrated to cash crop and beef when I was born.
Fantastic. And Amanda, what about you? Where are you from? You're from Guelph. I know that.
Yeah, I'm not from Guelph. I'm actually from a small town about an hour outside of Guelph, but not from a dairy farm, just a small town. Actually never touched a cow till I started grad school.
No way. How interesting.
So the town I grew up in probably had like 300 people in it.
Oh my.
Yeah, the town I live in now, which is like 10 minutes away, it has about 15,000 people. But it's funny because my advisor, who's Dr. Mike Steele, he always jokes that like the place I'm from is like very rough and
really? You don't look too scary, so that's good. We are going to talk about this contest in the respective research areas, and so we will bring it back right now. And I'd like you to just tell me a little bit about your work that you presented at the national meeting. And again, the way it works there at our national meeting is if you're a grad student and you have an abstract, you can tick a box and you can enter a competition. So Jason, why don't you start? So the title of your abstract was Impact of Cheese Age and Composition on the properties of microwave shelf-stable puff snacks made from cheddar cheese. So I read your abstract. It was too much for me. I don't know any of these words. But anyways, how would you describe it to a reproductive biologist? We just get the cow pregnant and the white stuff, we don't touch the white stuff that comes out of the cow, okay? What are you working on? And tell us how it's going.
Okay, so I guess if you had to think of a dairy snack, since we're all a little biased because we're all fans of dairy here, we'd say stuff like cheese curds, string cheese, or yogurt as a dairy snack. But if you go out onto the street and ask someone what's a dairy snack, you might get a response like, oh, Cheez-Its or cheese-flavored crackers or something that has a lot of non-dairy ingredients in it. So what we're looking at is we're trying to see how we can get dairy ingredients to puff and expand to make shelf-stable, crispy, crunchy, fun-to-eat snacks. There's a variety of ways you could accomplish this. We're looking at using just a simple home-style microwave oven that you'd have, that I'm sure all of you have in your homes. Nothing fancy or magical about it. How we can put a dairy solid into the microwave and get out an expanded cheese puff. And our current way of making a cheese puff is we're just making a cheddar cheese, drying it down to increase the protein content so it doesn't melt, put it into a microwave, and then instead of melting, when you heat it, it puffs and bubbles and blisters. And voila, a cheese puff.
Oh my gosh. So kind of like popcorn made out of cheese kind of stuff.
I have heard that analogy quite a few times. Yeah, that's a fair way of saying it.
I tell you what, I bet you that would taste really good because it would be like warm cheese, right? But crunchy.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm biased. It tastes better than a research project has any right to taste. Philip might have a few words about this. But yeah, it tastes good. So it comes out, it's hot. It's the water's all turned into steam. So it comes out, it's hot like popcorn. Then you let it cool down and then it's shelf stable. So you can come back to it later, like a week later, and bite into it. And it tastes salty, buttery, really good. A little toasted.
Everything's better with salt and butter. That's what I think.
That is true.
So this would be an entirely new sort of product for the dairy industry then?
Yes. So there are a few products like these out on the market, but they've made a very recent appearance in the market. Like if we think about the history of cheese making going back thousands and thousands of years, shelf-stable puffed cheese snacks are quite new, like appearing in the last decade or so. Yeah. And there aren't that very many of them out on the market. But yeah, it's definitely something new.
Just to fill in for some of our listeners, the consumption of dairy products in the United States per capita increases every year, but people consume different types of dairy products. In other words, they consume less fluid milk, more cheeses and yogurts and stuff like that. So this all contributes to the consumption of dairy. And it's a healthy thing, right? You don't got too many chemicals in there, do you, Jason? It's pretty healthy or what?
It's got the same ingredients list as you would have on cheddar cheese. Like there's no magic compound X that we're injecting into the cheese to make it expand. It's just we're harnessing what the cheese already wants to do.
That's what I like. It's all natural, okay? All natural. I'm going to go to Philip next. We all love mozzarella cheese, of course. It goes on your pizza. Philip, your title here was Impact of Different Types of Cellulose Anti-Caking Agents on the Functionality of Shredded, Low Moisture, Part Skim Milk, Mozzarella Cheese during different storage conditions. Now, before you describe what you did, okay, I have a question.
Yes.
Does mozzarella cheese have to come from a buffalo?
Great question. Historically, yes, but today, not anymore. And we have so many cattle. Just as the world's evolved, we can harness the milk that we have here.
So it could come out of a Holstein cow.
Oh, yeah, preferably. At least that's my opinion, but we don't discriminate. It can come from lots of different animals.
I think we're talking about the stuff that comes in the bag, right? That's already been graded, or what are we talking about here?
Correct. So a lot of research has been done on cheese making procedures, how we can adjust the composition to affect the end product of the cheese. But I was really looking at, after the cheese is made, what can we do to improve the functionality when it's stored? And so specifically looking at shreds. So if we go to a grocery store and we pick up a bag of pre-shredded cheese on the shelf, we're typically going to find on the label an anti-caking agent, or we'll even be able to see it on the shreds as this powder. And so the reason why it's added there is so that the shreds don't stick together, just become one large mass again, because we bought it as a shredded product. We want it to be able to remain in intact shreds. And
right, so when you're sprinkling it on the pizza, you don't want to be putting a baseball on the middle of your pizza, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know what that white stuff was, that cellulose. I thought it was mold.
It's funny that you do say that because in my free time, it's fun to go on social media or Reddit and see what consumers are thinking about the products that we're producing. So that's definitely been a comment, but that's anti-caking agent. It serves a purpose. It's safe, and many different types have been used in the market. So the big thing around my research is that many have been used, but there's not really big research on why they're used or what really makes a good anti-caking agent. So that's why I explored the different types of cellulose, just because they were particles with the same cellulose material, but different chemical makeup that affected their chemical properties, so that we could really pare down the variables to really identify what's exactly making them a good or not so good anti-caking agent.
Wow. So that was the purpose of your research then, is to really dive deep, take a deep dive into this anti-caking phenomena then.
Absolutely.
Is that what you work on now at your new job, anti-caking, or no?
No, now I'm in the cakes business, but I feel like there's a lot of transfer. So some anti-caking agents that I previously explored before this project were starch-based. And so now working with different starches in sweet baked snacks, there's definitely a lot of crossover. So a lot of this research has been very transferable to any career that I could really find in food science.
Sweet mixed snacks. What's a sweet mixed snack? Did you say sweet mixed snack?
Oh, excuse me, sweet baked snacks.
Sweet baked
so
snacks. Okay.
Cakes, yeah.
Yeah. That's so cool. Amanda, we're going to get to you in a second, but I'll ask Philip and then I'll pop back to Jason. Philip, did you always want to go into dairy food services? Why are you who you are?
So I grew up on a dairy farm, and so I really enjoyed being a part of agriculture. But going through high school, I really latched onto math and science. And I was a little scared because I loved the agricultural industry, but I didn't know exactly where I fit and where the math and science classes could take me. Mm-hmm. But then at the end of my high school career, I was introduced to food science through my agricultural education, or FFA program. And there they had a contest that I was able to explore milk products in evaluation. That was one contest I really enjoyed, but also food science and technology. And so I really wanted to marry those passions and really my background and continue that. And so of the different food products out there, I was definitely most passionate and knowledgeable about dairy. And so moving along through undergrad and then making the decision to go to grad school, I knew I wanted to work on products that I felt really passionate about. And so dairy was definitely at the top of my list for that.
That's so interesting. And I've got a million questions. This is pretty impressive. 2021 Distinguished Senior at The Ohio State University. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I was like, that was impressive. And before I ask Jason the same question, tell me what the job market is for food scientists that are with dairy. Is it good job market right now for you guys if you're looking for food scientists?
In my humble opinion, I would say yes, it's an incredible market to be in, because I know I was interviewing with multiple different companies, and especially coming from dairy, I ended up in bakery science for my job currently. But the thing about dairy is that, especially when talking about cheese, it's one of the most complex food matrix out there. And so you're working with something that's alive, that's evolving, the bacteria that is constantly changing the product, and also the chemistry, what chemical changes are happening. After understanding that, I feel like we have a really good grasp on different food moving forward. So I think it's a really cool place to come from, just because it's so applicable to all other facets of food science.
What's interesting about dairy and dairy food is it's all natural and comes from another living organism. As you know, with the dairy matrix, it's not something you take off the shelf and just sort of randomly mix up and voila, the white stuff wins, you know. So it is a great area to be in. Jason, did you always want to be in food science, dairy science? I thought you had a kind of interesting story where I think you started working in a lab maybe as a junior, and then you worked as a technician for a few years before you went to grad school, which was kind of interesting because a lot of times kids get their BS and they immediately want to go to grad school, but you worked for a little while. Did you just buy a really expensive truck that you needed to pay off, or why did you work for a few years? Tell me about that story. I think that's interesting.
I guess to start from the beginning, I remember it was junior year of undergrad. It was spring break, and I was sitting on my computer looking for a research job on campus, just because I knew that in the back of my mind, I wanted to go to grad school at some point. And I grew up on a farm, and I wanted to see if I could blend biochemistry and agriculture together. So I typed in I don't remember what the keywords I typed into the UW-Madison student job directory. And I think one of the first things that popped up was a place called the Center for Dairy Research. I thought, that sounds like an interesting place. Wow, they have a opening in their analytical department for a student hourly. So I applied, I got in, and I worked there until I graduated. And it just so happened that they had an opening for a full-time staffer around the time that I graduated. So I applied, and I was fortunate enough that I was able to continue working there full-time with some new responsibilities. Although my desk, it moved from a student hourly desk and moved about 10 yards to the left to a full-time desk. So that was kind of neat, working in the same room. And then I got to see what went on behind the scenes at CDR, which was really cool. I knew in the back of my mind that grad school is something I wanted to go for, but I just wasn't sure. Like, it's an awfully big step for someone to take. And I was thinking that I'd go back to biochemistry because I really like sciences and everything. And I talked to some of my mentors, and they said, well, why not food science? Well, then I thought, why not food science? And I looked into it, and it seemed like it was something that could blend both agricultural and biochemistry sciences. And that's how I ended up in grad school.
Food science, to be really good at it, takes a lot of science, right? It's a lot of science. And I saw you had those electron microscopy pictures, and you were trying to understand the structures of these puffs and stuff like that. And
yep.
But there's one thing I wanted to ask you. Okay, on that, I don't know if you ever looked at the page that had the interview on, but I think it's got a picture of you. There's a pizza on a table. You've got like a ruler going way up in the air and a fork. And I'm like, okay, I'm not getting the pizza, the fork, and the ruler and the puff. Like, what is that all about?
I remember the story behind that. Philip and I, we were both on the sensory panel at CDR, and that was one of my duties. I was the tallest person on sensory panel, so I'd always do the cheese stretch. So we see just how far it stretches before it breaks. That's a measurement we're interested in, or people with mozzarella projects are interested in. And this was right after I'd had that interview that you had mentioned. And one of our other sensory panelists was friends with the person who did the interview, and she needed a picture of me. So he snapped a picture and sent it to her, and she had it posted within like 5 minutes. It was very strange. So yeah, the picture has absolutely nothing to do with my research other than I was close to a piece of cheese at the time.
Well, now everybody will be going to that picture. Okay, so look for more hits. We've really ignored Amanda, and that's unfortunate because Amanda comes from the Department of Animal Biosciences at the University of Guelph, and her boss is Mike Steele. And I know that anybody who is familiar with dairy will know just what a tremendous place Guelph is and what a tremendous mentor Mike Steele is. But Amanda, I was stalking you too, and I saw you have a paper coming out in JDS Communications.
I do, yes.
Congratulations on that. Insulin, IGF-1 lactoferrin concentrations, colostrum transition in whole milk of primiparous and multiparous Holstein cows. Thank you for sending it there.
Of course. Yeah, that's actually a project that Mike and I submitted funding for in like 2016.
Oh my.
Yeah, it was we actually had a student from the Netherlands did the animal experiment, and it's been like this big, huge data set that we've been mining for like years and years. And this is one that we had some data that we have been sitting on for a while, and we're like, oh, this would be great to put in JDS Communication.
Well, really appreciate the submission, and it looks like it's coming out. I think it's probably in press.
Yeah, I think so. I just did the proof like last month.
You like to get down close to the cows, obviously, down deep near the mammary gland. Characterization of milk vein blood flow via Doppler ultrasound from dry off to calving, and its association with colostrum composition and yield in Holstein cows. So multiparous Holstein cows. So for our listeners, colostrum is not milk. It's the first secretion of the mammary gland, and it's full of antibodies and growth factors that are super important for the calf health. So we milk the cow, get that colostrum out of her. That's her very first milking, and then we feed that to the calf. Well, tell me about your research, because I know you're interested in the quality of colostrum. I think that's what you're working on.
Yeah, so I've done some work on quality of colostrum, and when I say quality, I mean like IgG content of colostrum, which helps ensure transfer of passive immunity in young calves, which is really important for their health and survival. But actually, most of my thesis focuses on oligosaccharides in colostrum, which are prebiotic compounds. But really, this topic that I presented at ADSA seems like it even gets away from both of those things. And really what I've noticed throughout my PhD and my research career, I've been studying colostrum the whole time. I kind of went from the calf, and now I'm at the cow level, seeing how we can manipulate colostrum production and colostrum composition composition. And what I've noticed is there's kind of this gap as we're trying to like implement strategies such as different dietary strategies or different management strategies and seeing how that can impact colostrum production. But we're like skipping a step. We don't know what's actually happening to the mammary gland or what physiological processes are impacting that mammary gland. So this study that I presented at ADSA, I really kind of tried to take a step back and we had no treatments at all. We just wanted to look at the udder and see how is colostrum produced and what influences colostrum production. So yeah, we used essentially blood flow to the mammary gland is a way for us to gauge mammary metabolic activity or the activity going on in the mammary gland. So when cows are dry, there's not a lot of activity happening, or so we think. It's basically just working on regenerating the tissue for when she goes into the next lactation. But this blood flow is directly related to that activity. And I wanted to see, does the level of activity influence the amount of colostrum that's produced or the different, like the types of bioactives that are in the colostrum? That was really the point of it. And we did use an ultrasound on the mammary vein, as you mentioned in the title. It was really hard for us to figure out a good way to assess blood flow during the dry period because cows are so pregnant. And what I initially wanted to do was to measure it on the mammary artery, which we can get to through the rectum. However, the cows are so pregnant that the fetus is so large. It's actually, as you know, as a reproductive biologist, it's very hard to get in there in the months of gestation. And we were also worried about inducing calving. So instead, we decided to use as a proxy, we thought, well, the amount of blood going in should ideally be similar to what comes out. And also I should have mentioned this before, but one of my co-advisors is Dr. John Cant. He's a lactation biologist in our department. He's really big on all things mammary metabolism and blood flow. So he was kind of helping me along with Mike develop this idea. So that's what we ended up doing.
You're kind of a little bit of an agricultural communicator, right? You write articles for journals, or did I read that wrong?
You mean like outreach journals?
Yes.
I'm sure this is something we would have gotten to later, but in between my master's and PhD, I did work as a research assistant for a couple years for Mike Steele. And a lot of my job there was like publishing in peer-reviewed journals, but also I did a lot of his outreach work for him. So like publishing in Progressive Dairy, Ford's Dairy, and things like that. And I also worked as a content creator for the Saskatoon Colostrum Company. So I wrote some articles for them. And I've also coordinated some conferences as well for Trow Nutrition and Forester Technic. So yeah, I've done a decent amount of outreach work, which I really love doing. So that's why I've done so much of it. I really like it.
I can tell you're all great communicators. And I guess that speaks to the contest, that in order to sort of make this happen, to win this contest, you have to be a good communicator. You know, everybody communicates in different ways, but you need to be able to communicate. You know, that's part of science, isn't it? To be able to communicate your ideas. And if you're writing grants, you need to be able to communicate them in a written way. If you're in front of an audience, you need to communicate in an oral way. I read both Progressive Dairy and Hordes, and I always enjoy the articles in there. Even though I'm kind of a hard science guy, I'd still like to see what people say. I'm going to go back to Jason. Jason, just tell me a little bit about your decision to enter the contest and why. I mean, you're you got it all. You're at Wisconsin, you don't need all this drama, right? So why did you enter this contest and why did you tick the box?
Yeah, there's a few other alumni of the lab who have entered this contest and either placed or gotten first place within living memory. So there's kind of that pressure to be as good as the old masters, if you will. Yeah. But I probably wasn't going to go into the competition, but every fall we have a platform where we can present our research to some industry people in the dairy industry. And I presented mine and I made sure that it was both entertaining as well as a little bit scientific. And I got an email from someone at work who said I should really consider going into the oral competition. And I sat and I thought about it, looked at what the work was involved, and I thought, what, I'll try it. And that's why I got into it, because someone believed in me and told me that I should try it.
Just for our listeners, you have to understand they're highly competitive. They're very competitive competitions. And depending on what part of the competition you're entered in, there can be quite a large number of participants. I did look at your PowerPoint. You see, you probably don't know all this stuff is posted on you. I looked at one of your PowerPoints about your cheese puffs. And it was quite entertaining. Okay. It was very entertaining. I started reading it and I was like, wow, this is a very well put together. Philip, did you same kind of thing? You just wanted to beat Jason in this thing and see what you could, was it that kind of thing? Little trash talk, little Ohio State, Wisconsin trash talk or what?
Oh my goodness, no, not at all. I really enjoy our lab because of how collaborative they are. But with that, I feel like it's really cool in our lab seeing everybody's strengths. And with that, I know after delivering some oral presentations that they weren't my favorite. They really made me anxious and it was just a lot of work. And just seeing what Jason can accomplish in oral presentation is amazing. Like he's so talented in that sense. But something where I felt like I really shined are those one-on-one conversations and something that I really enjoyed. And I saw that the poster competition really highlighted that strength. And then in addition, during my undergrad at Ohio State, I minored in agricultural communication. And with that, I took a visual design course. And so being able to sort of flex those muscles again and be able to working on designing a poster, I had a lot of fun with it. And then when we got to the competition, again, I just really enjoyed having those one-on-one conversations with the judges, with the people there to ask questions rather than delivering a formal presentation to a crowd. Again, very different skills, but I feel like I really enjoyed having those two options of the contest because I feel like everyone can find their fit in either one of them.
Yeah, I think Philip brings up a good point. So we have both oral and poster. We have different divisions. There's foods and production, oral and poster, MS, PhD. Philip, I thought you brought up a great point. Okay, so as a mentor, as a guy who looks at a lot of posters, man, there's some people who are not in touch with their visual worlds. Okay, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm like, oh, ouch, that hurts to look at. We need to have a discussion, you know? And then others, like they won off these beautiful posters or beautiful. And you can't always predict whose it's going to be, you know? But so you can take a class in that. I think I'm going to send a few of my students to that class. Like, what do they teach you in class? Like, don't put these two colors together or what? Like, that's ugly or what? Oh my God.
I mean, a little bit of everything. At Ohio State, they had a really good agricultural communication class. And with that, it's just learning the basic elements of design. Simplicity is always a good rule of thumb. And then always having a style guide to refer to. I feel like I'm really lucky because Wisconsin Center for Dairy Research, I was able to tap into their style guide and look at those colors that they use together that work well together.
Yeah.
So just sort of basing off that, keeping it simple, capitalizing on graphics definitely was really cool. I know BioRender was a tool that one of my friends and colleagues showed to me, and it was really fun to turn my materials and methods into graphics just so it's a little easier on the eye.
Yeah, I think the BioRender, like my students use it, and that's really caught on tremendously, right? I don't know, with artificial intelligence now, you probably just type into, Chat GPT, make me a poster on cheese curds and, go, this thing will spit out like, oh, that's pretty good, just pop in a few graphs and you're on your way, And Amanda, you seem like you're just sort of a person who's been in the communications business for a while. So was it just a natural thing for you to enter, or was it a competition thing, or you ticked the wrong box? You meant to tick no, you hit yes. I mean, how did you end up in this thing?
No, so at the University of Guelph, it's not as easy as just ticking the box for us. it's hard because even if we have so many grad students, if we want to compete earlier on, sometimes only one of us can go forward. So our teacher has to choose which one of us gets to go in the competition. So yeah, I actually did the poster competition in my master's, in the last year of my master's at ADSA. And I really enjoyed doing that. And then I just thought during my PhD at some point, I wanted to do the oral competition. And I'm nearing the end. So I thought, well, this is going to be the year, hopefully, if it's going to happen. And yeah, we went forward in our department and I got chosen to go forward. So yeah, that's how it happened.
So and I want to get to Jason on this too, from the food science part. Philip told us a little bit about some of his thoughts on the poster part of the equation, and I want to circle back to that. But Amanda, when you approached this competition, was it just random thoughts, or did you have a strategy? Did you have a mentor? What is your philosophy on approaching, 12 minutes with 3 minutes for questions?
Yeah. So even if you don't do the competition a lot of the time, I always usually choose oral presentations at ADSA. So I'm used to the 12-minute format, but we've had almost a lot of years in our lab. We've had a lot of people go through the competitions, and even when I was in my master's. So I've seen them do very well in their strategies. And yeah, I think the biggest thing, like my biggest strategy, I'd say is I always think the background is probably almost the most important part, because if they don't understand what you're trying to show them in the results, then I don't think it's going to transfer. So I always spend a really long time. I think I spend most of my time trying to make sure the background is a really nice story and that people understand it and that the slides all and the ideas all link together. But yeah, I'd say that's my biggest strategy. I also like to use metaphors a lot because, like, a lot of the time your judges are people like you who is a reproductive biologist and not someone who's a colostrum researcher. So I try and use things that everyone can relate to. But yeah, I'd say that's mostly my strategy, I guess, that I had.
Do you make beautiful slides or ugly slides, or what's your plan there for the slides?
So I've also recently been very inspired by BioRender, and everyone in my lab keeps joking that like this BioRender craze has taken over our lab. So yeah, BioRender has really taken over my life. You can spend hours in there just making things look so pretty. So yeah, I make them look very visually appealing so that people aren't bored by it.
So Jason, so tell me about your thoughts on that. Did you have an approach to this thing, just how you were going to approach this 12 minutes and 3 minutes for questions? Were you going to approach it like a biochemist, or how were you going to approach that?
I just kind of threw stuff onto slides and started talking about it. And I just timed myself to see how long it took.
Yeah.
And then stepped back and thought, okay, does this make for a good story and everything? Am I talking enough about the cheese and enough about the puffs and about how the bridging together is? And then from there, I just kind of whittled it down until it was 12 minutes. And then I always try to make it a little entertaining, make sure that my audience isn't going to get lost, because my personal philosophy is that if you lose an audience member at any point during the presentation, you're never going to get them back. Like once they're lost, they're lost forever. And it's some people just get lost. Sometimes it's because of what you put on the slide or how you say something.
Yeah.
So I try to minimize that as much as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the need to make it entertaining or interesting so people hang in there with you, and I give a lot of talks all over the world, and I probably tend to the too much entertainment part of the world, and I always sort of wonder about that, like for me personally, I think there's a good balance, right? There's a little bit of entertainment, there's a little bit of science in there, and you know what I mean? Do you have any thoughts on that, Jason?
Not to be blunt, but I think the bar is set pretty low. Like if you throw in a joke, you're already doing a lot better than a lot of presentations in terms of making it entertaining. But having too many jokes, it starts to detract from what the message you're trying to get across. So it's like trying to strike a nice balance. I actually drew a lot of inspiration from John Oliver. He does his shows. He presents something. It's got facts in it. It's got a story, but he also throws in jokes to make it entertaining.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, maybe we could get him on here. All right, let's see what he says. Philip, so you have a little different thing. So they have their 12 minutes to do their thing, and it's all timed and drama and bells going off and stuff like that. And how do you approach presenting a poster? Are you also trying to do 12 minutes, or do you just whatever happens? What was your thinking on that? How long did you want to engage the judge in a poster competition?
I try to condense mine 2 to 3 minutes, and
Wow.
I know, or at least under 5, just keep it more condensed. And I know there's a lot of information on the poster, but what I want to round about it is that, like, being realistic, nobody's going to read the entire poster. So what I focus on was the story, the background, why was it done, and not necessarily go through every bullet point that was on my poster, and then really focus on the big ideas. So I talked about as much as I could the big research findings, but I didn't talk about everything that made it onto my poster. And not everything on my poster was everything I've done. So it was like definitely condensing like funneling all my research. So funneling everything that I actually did, what made it onto the poster, and then what I actually said in the pitch, honestly.
I think these contests are I think they're quite good, because I think you don't want scientific presentation or poster presentation to become a lost art. You know what I mean? You don't want it to become a lost art, because I do think there's a manner in which to concisely present information in an interesting manner that people can absorb. And I do think it's important. And it's important that students kind of learn that, because like sometimes you go to a national meeting and you sit through the oral presentations or the poster present, more so the oral presentations. And some of the individuals, you just think someone needs to take this person aside and really mentor them on that presentation and help them understand the elements of a good presentation, either because it was mentioned by some of the others earlier that, you lost everybody after the third slide and nobody knew what you were talking about. You need to slow down. You need to present a better picture in forehand. So these are important things. We don't want, as a scientific community, for them to be lost. Being able to communicate your science. I remember one of the people that really influenced my thinking in terms of all this was Oliver Smithies. Oliver Smithies won the Nobel Prize for basically developing methods to knock out genes in mice. And he was a Nobel Prize winner, and he came to the University of Missouri and he gave a lecture, and I was so excited to go listen to him because he was so famous. And he gave the most beautiful, simple lecture. Beautiful, simple concepts, simple slides. And I thought to myself, that's how you do it. This guy could have buried us with information, buried us with technical details, but he didn't. 500 people, and I don't think one person got lost. It was just really special. And so that really affected me in a major way. And I think some of these elements are really what's coming through in this interview. You guys have that same sort of notion. It's important. I always tell my students, before you even start designing a talk or making a presentation, ask yourself, who am I talking to? Am I talking to veterinarians? Am I talking to fellow food scientists who might be interested in the more detailed aspects? Am I talking to freshmen who don't really understand where milk comes from? And it's important. Understand who you're talking to. So Amanda, did you think you would win? When you were done, you're like, oh, nailed it. Where do I go to pick up my check? I mean, how did that work?
No, I don't think I felt that good at the end. But for us, I'm not sure if it was the same for the food science division, but we actually presented virtually 2 weeks before, and it was judged before. So essentially, and it was the same for the master's students as well, because we had a student who's also in the master production oral. So essentially 2 weeks before, we logged into Zoom. We picked a time slot. So I could see from choosing the time slots that there was like 12 other people or maybe even more. We all picked time slots. We log into Zoom and they said, okay, start your presentation. I was like, oh, okay. So start it.
Wow, no way.
Yeah, so it's judged actually before, and the master student who had won, she actually found out like the day after she did her virtual presentation. But I went into the conference and I hadn't heard a thing. So I was like, oh, I didn't win. Like I just assumed I didn't win and they just didn't email me. So then we're like a day the conference and I'm like sitting there and everyone's asking me, oh, the contest, how'd it go? I'm like, I don't think I won. Like I didn't hear anything. And then like the Monday night or Tuesday night, I think it must have been the Monday night, I got an email and it's like, congratulations, you won and you're going to the dinner tomorrow. I was like, oh my God, I won.
Yeah.
So I really didn't come out of it thinking I knew I won. And I also couldn't see the other competitors. I only saw myself, which is different from when I had seen it like during my master's before COVID. It was in person. So I could like see how everyone else was doing and gauge like, oh, did I do good or did I not? And this time I had literally no idea because I didn't know what other people had presented.
Did they do it virtually for you, Jason, or no? Were you?
There was no virtual aspect to it for the foods oral competition.
Or the posters, I assume, Philip. You were at the meeting then.
Correct.
I wonder I don't know. And now I feel really silly. I didn't know they did the virtual, Amanda. I guess that might be a new thing or something.
So I've noticed it's since COVID, they've been doing it like that. The one nice thing I think about them doing it virtually is they don't have to limit the amount of people because they have like 12 to 15 of us. Whereas if you actually have a session like live, you're not going to have like a 5-hour session. So that's why they're doing it because they're getting so many entries. I'm not sure, but yeah, it was different, but I still did get to present it at the meeting. Just I was slotted into like a general oral session.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's always been a scheduling nightmare, is that if you have all the posters in the competition in one session, it kind of takes the kids out of their normal session that they would be in. How did you get yourself psyched up to do virtual? Because I don't know, man, it's hard. Virtual's hard, isn't it?
I feel I do better with like a crowd because I can be like, I can gauge like, oh, they got it. Like they're like, people are nodding. But with this, I couldn't see anyone. So I kind of just, I don't know how I psyched myself up. I had practiced it a lot. So I was like, I applied. And then when I logged in, I minimized the judges. I was just like practicing.
That's one thing we talk about in my class because I teach 18-year-olds, half of whom don't come to my class. So, because I record all the lectures and everything's online, but I also give it live, and I try to explain to them there's still value in people standing in the same room, and having a conversation like in the same space, breathing the same air. This isn't too bad. But when you're making a presentation, you gather energy from those around you,
Yeah, I agree.
There's something we don't understand about that. I think there's a whole element of biology that we don't understand is that, when you have a conversation in person, you gain more energy than if you have a conversation on a Zoom call, or certainly if you have a conversation on a phone call, or certainly if you write a text. All right. But anyways, it's interesting, isn't it? That sort of human three-dimensional living, breathing dynamic. So we're going to go back to Jason. You're not employed yet. So how many more years you got to go in your program?
The whole story is I started as a master's student, and then UW-Madison, the food science department allows people to do a bypass. So you can start as a master's student, and then if you like the process and if things work out, you can finish as a PhD student without the master's degree. I did my bypass this year, so I'm hoping to graduate with a PhD, and hopefully sometime next year. Knock on wood, the table's made out of wood.
So then you're going to go become a faculty member, or how does it work?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So I grew up on a farm in western Wisconsin. I love it. I miss it dearly. I don't know if cities just do it for me, but unfortunately, I've effectively educated myself out of a job for my hometown. So that's something I'm wrestling with. What do I do after graduation? Academia, government work, or industry? I don't know which yet.
I guess the high school football coach is out. You don't do high school coaching or anything like that, huh?
Well, if I move back home, maybe I could do that part-time. I wouldn't be very good.
But yeah. Philip, did you ever think about going and becoming a faculty member, or that was never going to be your world, or what were you thinking?
I'm intrigued, but the PhD barrier is something there where I don't know if I want to go for, but something that I think would be effective if after years of getting experience in industry, I think it would be fun for me to go back and be a lecturer or a guest lecturer. I think that would be really fun.
Right. So you have a master's degree, or do you have
Correct,
a PhD?
master's.
You have a master's degree. Yeah. Okay. And Amanda, what are you thinking? Canada's different than America. What does the faculty landscape look like in Canada? Are there a lot of faculty positions open in agriculture in Canada?
It depends. It kind of ebbs and flows. At the University of Guelph, I'd say right now we have a lot of pretty young profs in dairy. So I don't see there being like a ton added, maybe one or two over the next 10 years or so. But yeah, it comes and goes. It's hard though, because the funding landscape is very different here at universities compared to in the US. We receive a decent amount of government funding for research programs, like as a faculty member. So when jobs do come up, they're very competitive, which all of them are, even in the US, I know, but we get a lot of people from the US applying as well.
Oh, wow.
I would love to be a faculty member, but whether that happens, whether I stay in academia, I picture myself doing research. I think in an academic setting is what I'm used to and what I really like. But as I mentioned before, I really like the outreach work as well. So maybe something that could meld those two things together, I would really enjoy.
Is this true in Canada? In the United States, it seems like there's a lot of students that just don't want the faculty lifestyle with all the pressure and the grant writing and the teaching. And is that true in Canada, or they don't feel that? I mean, at Guelph, do you get that sense that like, I'm not doing what Mike Steele does? It's just too much drama, too much work.
I'd say, like, from what I've seen, I do find that more students in the US go towards industry, it seems, compared to here. But again, the positions in Canada are so limited for us for faculty that I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I think it just depends on the student. I don't think that everyone's pushing for faculty or everyone's pushing. It's probably split down the middle, maybe.
The funding is a big part of it, isn't it? Whether or not you can get funding.
Yeah. And like what your outlook would look like if you had a research program. Like, are you going to have to push for funding all the time? Is it always going to be like you're down to the budget? Or is it going to be very robust and you have lots of funding coming in? It's really, I think, a big thing for people.
Yeah. So Jason, did you get any good advice going into graduate school? Or did anybody say something to you that made a lot of sense or really helped you get through a difficult period in graduate school, or any advice that you have that maybe you got that maybe you'd like to pass along?
Difficult period in grad school. That's a good question. Yeah, I guess I'm drawing a blank on advice that I got, but if I'm talking to someone, or if someone's listening who's in grad school and they're having a tough time, I just say that you're not alone and there are resources to help you. I remember my first couple months of grad school, I was like, oh boy, do I really belong here? Am I cut out for grad school? Am I going to wash out? And eventually, just day by day, week by week, it gets better. It gets easier. You learn more about your system, and there are people to help you along the way.
Is it fun? Are food science labs fun to work in?
As a rule, it is always fun if you can eat what you're working on any given day. If it tastes good or not, that's another question. And again, I'm a little biased, but yes, I'd say food science labs are fun to work in.
They sound like fun. I mean, you and Philip both seem like really fun people. Philip, did you have any advice for people thinking about grad school? Or do you think your graduate training got you a better job in the end? Do you think you got a better job because you had the additional training?
I definitely believe so. I am a firm believer of investing in your education is always a good idea. And so being able to really hone in on my critical thinking skills, really focusing on the why, because just compare myself to before grad school versus after grad school, I find myself really thinking more critically and really diving into why things are phrased a certain way, or really when people present information, like really being able to ask better questions. So I really enjoyed that aspect. And also being alongside incredible researchers like Jason here in my entire lab under Dr. John Lucy. It was a really incredible time and really formative for my science career. And during one of my tough days, a quote that sort of got me through to that I saw posted on one of my lab mates' desk was a quote by St. Catherine of Siena, that nothing great is ever achieved without much enduring. And I just thought that was something that really gave me fuel when I was running out of steam during my grad school career, just because it's definitely tough. It's definitely going to take a lot of effort, but in the end, it's definitely worth doing.
John Lucy, he's the other Lucy in the dairy science world. Okay, there's two of us. Well, there's probably more, but does he run a huge lab, or does he just have a regular lab with 5 or 6 students in it, or what is the story?
His lab's historically one of the bigger ones in the food science department. I think when Philip started and during his tenure here, we were the largest, if not one of the largest in the department. And now we've shrunk a little bit. It ebbs and flows. As for food science on campus, we're one of the smaller departments. So a bigger lab in a smaller department on campus, if that makes sense.
So Amanda, good days, bad days, or thoughts on anything or advice you'd give for students or not give? We could always just flip it. What's the worst piece of advice you ever got in your graduate career? There's lots of those.
I think I probably buried those and just tried not to think about any bad advice people gave.
Right.
Yeah, there's always good days, bad days as a PhD or even MSc student. Advice I would give, you kind of go into it thinking you have to know everything and you have to be like an expert. And there comes a point where you realize you don't know everything and nobody knows everything, and that's okay. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned, is that it's okay to not know every little thing about everything you're always talking about with people. And that's the fun of learning what other people do and listening to people from different disciplines talk. It wouldn't be fun to listen to different people talk if you had to understand every little thing, and you'd never learn anything.
I think one of the things that Jason touched on, and it's got me concerned, is that we are seeing quite an increase in mental health issues among graduate students globally, PhD students globally. And there was a paper in Science or Nature, I'm not sure which one, but that was showing those trends in mental health issues amongst graduate students. I just think that's something we need to address. I think we need to think about graduate training and what is it about graduate training that is causing this. It was a very sharp increase in mental health issues. And I just think that's something we need to figure out. Obviously, I think you guys are from really great labs. And when you're from a really great lab, that makes it better. That helps, right? It helps to be from a great lab with a great mentor who understands students. But then not everybody has the same experience. Anything else you guys want to say before we close? I mean, Jason, you got anything else to say? When are we going to eat them cheese puffs? I'll come up and I'll have some, okay? I want to work in Jason's lab. We get to eat our experiments.
Yeah. It's always fun when you get to do that. If you want to try your own shelf-stable snack cheese puffs, and again, this isn't like me advertising or sponsoring companies. There's some products out on the market. Moon cheese is probably the biggest one in the US. There's also Umland's Cheese Puffs. And then across the pond over into Europe, I think there's Cheezos. And there's a fourth one I know, but I'm drawing a blank on it. So they're out there if you look for them, but you might have to look a little hard for them.
I'm going to keep an eye out. I tell you what, and I'm also I want to get into this business where you get to buy a pizza, get a ruler and measure and then eat the pizza when it's done. I mean, you probably ate that pizza for lunch when you were done with that little experiment. I like that stuff, and us cow guys, we sometimes eat the cows, but it's, it's not the same afternoon typically. Hopefully not, right? And then Philip, any last thoughts before, you're in the real world now making money? Did you buy your big pickup truck yet? Have you paid off your student loans yet? That's the big question.
Yeah, I am debt free. I was super fortunate, and there were a lot of scholarship opportunities I was able to take advantage of. And so I was lucky to graduate debt free, and I'm saving money currently for a new vehicle. So I'm excited.
Oh, yeah. Gonna get off the bicycle. Okay, good deal. Amanda, any final thoughts before we move on? Anything you'd like to say or comment on?
No, just
our listeners.
Maybe I also made a mistake not going into food science, because usually when I'm working, I can't even put my hands near my mouth afterwards. So no fear of getting crypto or something. So I don't have any final thoughts, but thank you so much for having us. This has been great.
Yeah, you guys have been great. And I'm going to close in just a second, if I can find my closing sheet among all my sheets here. We do these once a year, and you never know how it's going to go. But when we do these, what you find is that there are great graduate students in the American Dairy Science Association that are just so well-spoken, way better than when I was at your level, okay? So well-spoken, and we can be really proud. And it's really great to speak to people on the food side as well as the production side. And I particularly appreciate Philip and Jason for explaining their work in a manner that I can understand. And Amanda, we're so appreciative of your work and Mike Steele's work and University of Guelph in general, which is just providing so much great information on the dairy. I would like to say thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being who you are. Enjoy your science. It's been a great podcast, really fantastic. So, all right, everybody, that brings us to the end of our show. If you enjoy Dairy Digressions, be sure to like, subscribe, and rate us and spread the word to a friend or colleague. If you have feedback for us, please let us know at adsa@adsa.org for show notes and more episodes of Dairy Digressions, and to learn about everything going on at ADSA, go to adsa.org. Until next time, thank you everyone for listening. Thanks a lot, everybody.